Good morning, everybody. Good morning. So I'm a children's television writer, and I'm a death doula. And I know this thing may sound strange to some of you, because it does sound strange to me sometimes sitting next to each other, but writing was always the goal. I started writing stories when I was 7. I wrote a fairy tale about a 7-year-old little boy who ran away from home because his mom wouldn't stop smoking cigarettes. Still hates cigarettes, kind of autobiographical. I stayed up all night working on that story. If there are any writers here, you know that feeling. You just have to get it out. And, I woke up the next morning. I left it on the bed. I was so proud of myself. Went to school, told all my friends, hey, I wrote this story about a kid running away, jumped on a train, went somewhere. And they're excited. They're like, bring it to school the next day. But I get home, and my parents are sitting there. They're reading this letter. And, what they thought was a letter. They're reading this story. And they say, oh, we thought you ran away, and they're about to call the police. But all I could think was, damn, I must be that good. So I honed those skills, and off of everything that my pens have written, I've been able to travel the world as a storyteller, a poet, a playwright. In fact, I was actually in Amsterdam when I got the call that I'd been accepted into the Sesame Street Writers' Room. Yeah, appreciate it. And it was great, yeah, because as a kid, I was one of those ones who asked that age-old question, can you tell me how to get to Sesame Street? And I finally had the address. And so, and it was great. It was great. But, it was strange because everything that I'd created before this had nothing to do with children, at least not directly. See, I'd come from creating and producing and directing socially conscious content that some called heavy. My first film was Seeking Asylum. It was a documentary about me trying to escape America. My second was Outside the House, about Black mental health. And my third was Set Yourself on Fire, about the global rape epidemic. So heavy, yes. But I like to say that it was more about how society's failing us and how society could be positively transformed. And so it was Sesame Street, it was New York, it was exciting, and it was my chance to ask myself, how can I create better people? See, I long lived by the quote of Frederick Douglass, it is easier to build children than it is to repair broken men. And so my first question in that writer's room was, how can I create content that keeps kids from turning into the adults that we're so busy repairing? And it was a hard but necessary question, especially coming from work that had been so heavy it took me weeks to recover from an interview. And I was able now to create this work that was light. It was encouraging kids to get out there and play. It was able to inspire imagination and curiosity and creativity in the minds of young children. And it worked. I left Sesame Street and I went to work for Blue's Clues, if anyone knows that show. Yay, Blue's Clues. One of my favorite dogs. Rubble and Crew, Nickelodeon, Karma's World, and some really amazing shows. And I loved it. It was my chance to see that my work actually mattered. And so I'm a death doula as well. And this thing popped up on me in one of those wow moments I hope we all get to experience from time to time. And it shouldn't have been much of a surprise when I finally found out what it was. At 9, I was helping my family navigate the loss of my great aunt Greta May after lung cancer. Again, I hate cigarettes. And 9 years old, I didn't fully understand what death was. I'd never really experienced it. But every night my mom would come home and give me updates. And her last update, she said that my great aunt Greta May said that earlier that day her mother had come to see her. And again, not knowing much about death, I somehow knew that my great aunt Greta May seeing her mother, a woman who died a few years before in her hospital room, probably meant death was coming for her too. At 12, it was 1994. AIDS was the leading cause of death for Americans aged 25 to 44. And I had a cousin, Maine, who wanted to come home to die. And families at that time were a little ignorant to the disease, and so many didn't want to come around. But my grandmother, this woman who was so full of love and compassion, welcomed him home. And so together we'd sit, we'd feed him, we'd fetch blankets, watch TV shows, sit in silence a lot of times. I told some jokes that I heard in school. And he loved it. And I'm not sure when Maine died, but I just remember the silence that stayed around that house for a very long time after. The next year, just looking for something to do after school, I volunteered at a local hospice. Not thinking much of it. It was an ad on public access. And it was my chance to pretend I knew how to crochet, make toast. Yeah, some of you worked in houses. Pretending how to crochet. I made toast with a little bit of cinnamon, a little bit of sugar, a little bit of butter. But my favorite part of the job was sitting in this room with some of the patients. We'd sit there, they'd tell me their stories, they'd ask for hugs, they'd want to hold my hand, and I was 13, I didn't think much of it, I'm just here to listen, and sometimes we just sit there. And I didn't know what this thing was called. I didn't have a name for this thing I was doing, this holding hands, this hugging, this holding of space. It was all intuitive. It was just who I was at the time, who I am. And then one day, sitting in Daytona Beach, talking to a friend, a hospice nurse, and I'm telling her about all these experiences that I'm telling you about, and she says, "Oh, it sounds to me like you're a death doula." And I'd never heard the term before, not from my grandmother, who had obviously done the work, not from my mom, who had done the work, not from uncles, family, any of these people. But it made sense. And for me, it was just about trying to make sure that no one felt alone. So it wasn't this thing that I was trying to make sense of, it was just a thing that I did. And so as a death doula, I offer emotional support and guidance to those nearing the end of their life and those who are navigating these waves of grief. I simply just don't want people to feel alone. It's about facilitating a peaceful and dignified transition. And so as a death doula, a lot of the work that I'm doing now is in Black communities. I'm helping folks to not only navigate the profound journey of life's conclusion, but to also make sense of Black grief. So Black grief. Recently, I sat on a plane from South Africa to Morocco, and next to a man who asked how Black grief was any different from the grief that he, a white man, would experience at the loss of a loved one. And I told him that Black grief tends to be more communal. It's more frequent, and more times than not, it's too soon. And though grief is as necessary and as it is natural, Black folks rarely get enough time to process and fully grieve the death of a loved one or the death of a thing before it's time to move on to grieve another. So in these places where I show up with comfort and joy and compassion and love and empathy, I also show up ready to celebrate life, ready to call names, ready to call in the ancestors, and to say, I know you said you don't need me, but I'm just outside if you need anything. And so I'm a death doula, and I'm a children's television writer. And it's strange, I know. But it wasn't until halfway through an interview that I realized where these two things meet. I was at an interview with Esalen, if anyone knows Esalen Institute. I teach up there from time to time. And I was in an interview for the podcast, and the interviewer asked, he says, these things seem so disconnected. Have you thought about a theme for all the work you're doing, the death work, the children's writing, the activism, the films, and all these things? And honestly, I hadn't thought about it. It never crossed my mind. I just do what feels good at the moment. I always say, the moment I stop having fun with it, I'll be done with it. Guys, you're Drake. But I hadn't thought about it. And in that instant, it all came to me, and I thought, all the work that I've been doing, the death doula work, the writing, everything was all about leading people back to joy and happiness. So deathbeds and writing rooms. In both of these jobs, I'm finding ways to bring joy to those who want, need, and deserve it. I'm creating safe spaces for children and those at the end of their life so they can be fully themselves and vulnerable. I'm creating the space big enough so they can continue to grow. Because as long as we're still alive, why shouldn't we continue to grow? And it's not so much about shutting out the world, these two things, making things seem pretty for everyone and making things seem right. It's about getting to the truth, because in the truth is where I'm able to show them, children and those at the end of their life, what may come. Showing them what's out there. And so I stand here today as a testament that joy knows no boundaries. It is present in the laughter of children and in the serenity of those transitioning. I've discovered that the key to bringing joy lies in embracing and honoring every phase of existence and celebrating every stage of life. And all this was made present for me because at 22, I was diagnosed with a blood clotting condition that could probably kill me at any moment, just hopefully not right now. And so I stand here as a testament that human experience, like joy, knows no boundaries. Being alive and being aware that we're going to die are the same. So being a death doula is being a life doula. So it's about celebrating every stage of life. And if we truly believe that joy is a human right, then I hope we pay attention to those being able to access it. Thank you so much.